Welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, OCs, HR recruiters, and one actor as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today we're going to continue our discussion with Tim Sharples. And Tim, we're looking at law enforcement and the great work that IO psychology is doing with trying to bring police forcing really into the 21st century. And I know we've got David Schiff with us today, and we're going to spend some time talking about the way things used to be and the way we're trying to move things forward. But before we get there, there's been a question been running around in my head for the last few days.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because I always like to put you on the spot to start the show. Um, when I'm watching news, and I'm a big U.S. news junkie, um, lots of negative stories about policing. Why don't we see any positive stories? Because I know they got to be out there. I mean, just the work that's being done here. I heard about it on Work Cookie. I'm not hearing about it in the media.
So as soon as you say you're a big U.S. news junkie, I was buried to ask you, how's the depression going?
Well, I live in Canada, so I'm just viewing.
Yes, yeah, you're um so the answer to your question is, we're hardwired as human beings for survival. And the brain is not wired for happiness, it's more for survival. So bad news stays with us a lot longer than good news. So to answer your question, there are good news stories out there that are happening all the time. One reference I made was about Project EQ in West Virginia, who has a partnership with Talent Smart EQ, where every certified peace officer in the state of West Virginia gets their own emotional intelligence survey completed, and then the training on top of that as to how law enforcement will interact differently with the communities that they serve. And that includes dispatchers and jailers too.
Well,
Uh, Big news story. An entire state is doing this. It's only getting play in West Virginia or those surrounding states that the news coverage kind of like goes across borders. Like I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I get a lot of stuff that's going on in South Carolina. So that's a big hit, and it's paid for by the state and does not get a lot of play. And there are other news stories like that. Just this morning, there was a news story about, I think it was LA County Sheriff's Office, where they were able to rescue a driver who was having a medical emergency while he's driving. And one officer is in the passenger seat of the patrol vehicle, steering the victim's car as they're heading towards a busy intersection. So that was literally on the news today.
wow, yeah, I missed that one. And in the mood of spreading the word, can you share with us where you are right now and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm actually in Waukesha, which I'm here supporting the International Association of Chiefs of Police, their Valor Initiative for Officer Resiliency. And if Waukesha sounds vaguely familiar, that was the site of massive violence um, incident during the Christmas Day parade about, I believe, 3 years ago. So part of the Valor program is we are out teaching Valor and resiliency. And the cool thing is the Waukesha PD had so much support from surrounding agencies that the class is open to everyone. And they've had other classes like this. And we had 60 people, and the vast majority were from surrounding agencies as well as Waukesha. So it was a good day of training and one of those things that need to be highlighted. So thank you for that question, Tom. That was awesome.
Well, you're welcome, and congratulations for the work that you are doing in taking this movement forward. All right, we should probably get on with the show. So, would you like to introduce our gift and tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, David Schiff, I've known for years. I can't count how many. We have been coworkers at several points in time. He is a friend and a mentor. David has an extensive history. When I think about OG, and again, some people, depending on your how you define it, either old guy or original gangsta, depending on your parlance with that. But David has been a certified peace officer in the state of Georgia since 1970. I was 3. But the cool thing about David is he's a smart guy, but he's also a certified peace officer. So, um, a performance engineer by trade. His company's called the Operating Group. That kind of gives you, where his bent is on the psychology spectrum. And well, I'll let David tell you about the rest. But like I said, as I told David this morning, as I was thinking about how to introduce him, David has had his hand on the steering wheel of law enforcement since 1970, trying to keep it on the right track. And a lot of it he's done as a certified peace officer, but also as working as a performance engineer, looking for that sustained positive change in law enforcement.
Well,
So
welcome, David. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Tom. And Rodney, thank you so much, buddy, for being so responsive and helping me get back on track, get in the meeting. Um, Tom, I've talked to reporters all over the country, and the, the news is that bad news sells, good news does not sell. And most of the press and the whole media is against police. There's an enormous amount of money being spent in a very number of areas to denigrate the police. And, and that's been going on for a long time. And one of the major parts is organized crime since the 30s has been pushing this. So, and the idea of defunding the police, reimagining the police, and changing the police, and changing citizen expectations. For example, you may have heard the saying, protect and serve. It used to be on cars. You probably can't find that saying anymore, anywhere in the country. Protect and serve has been the cause for a number of unfounded lawsuits against police officers. Citizens think police are there to protect them. We are not protectors. The Supreme Court said the only people we are required to protect by law are those in our custody. No one else. Now, our ethics say to protect the weak, the humble, naive, the ignorant, and so on and so forth. And that's okay. But for example, if Susie calls and says, my boyfriend just called, said he was going to come over and kill me. Susie, did you record it? No. Did anybody hear it? No. How far away does he live? About 20 minutes. Well, we can't send an officer because first of all, even if we were staff, we can't send people to sit by Susie's house. Now, when Susie goes to work, we can't escort her under armed guard to protect her from her boyfriend at work. When she goes to the hairdresser, we can't protect her. If she goes out on another date, we can't protect her. We cannot protect. The rule is when bad things start happening and seconds count, we're only minutes away. By that time, the rape, the assault, the death has occurred, period. That's what's happened. Now, so that's, now in the old days, quote, the old days, and Tim, as I've mentioned to you before, I really want you to interrupt me if I start going down a path that you prefer or not. My other foot is in the area of performance engineering since 1977. And that I think it's what y'all probably say is industrial psychology. When I went to Georgia Tech, it was called applied psychology. If a company or organization has a group of people who are not producing the results, the valued results that are wanted, we go in, we find out exactly why, with surgical precision, people are not producing the results.
David, you said, what are some of the initiatives that you have worked on where you have helped police departments to better perform public services and measure that as being sustainable and put metrics around some of their, very nebulous words.
Great. You're interested in evidence and data. Wonderful. How unusual for psychologists, at least the clinical ones that I have to deal with. One is civilian complaints, and this was long before computers and body cameras. One is to reduce civilian complaints. An English teacher came up with a term called verbal judo. And that was the main quote de-escalation thing. And police departments consider them problem officers because they said, sir, reason I stopped you was, you ran a red light. Let me see your driver's license. Give me your driver's license. And so I'm not going to give it to you. And they say, give me your goddamn driver's license right now. I'm going to put your ass in jail. That's the way it used to go. But now there's a way of talking to people that de-escalates it. So it's all right. I observed that you went through the stop sign without stopping. Oh, first of all, hi, I'm Officer David Schiff. Notice you ran through the stop sign. Is everything okay? And then we're watching to see if they're stressed. They have a medical urgency. They have to get somewhere, or they're a surgeon who's late for a whatever. And we say, okay, may I see your driver's license? And they say, I'm not going to give you my driver's license. Well, sir, I can understand your hesitancy. Just let me explain. In Georgia, the driver's license belongs to the state. So when an officer asks you, you are obligated by law to give it to us. If you don't, then we have to take you to jail. Now, I'm sure you don't want that. So may I please see your driver's license?
So David, I'd like to point out that you were working on that initiative well before body-worn cameras as well.
Yes, back in the 90s, early 90s.
Because we all know how old school policing goes. As I said, I'm a second generation police officer. So when David got started in 1970, my father was also going through the academy as well. And one of the things that was the Miranda warnings were Supreme Court, it had come out around the same time. And it was, oh, we can't do our job. Well, the curtain falls, time passes. I go through my academy in 1988, and we can't imagine not doing our job without Miranda. So these changes, and David's also an instructional designer, to help show law enforcement officers how we are able to do our job better, and again, for sustained improvement of that role.
So when this came out and we all started teaching it, civilian complaints went way down. And then almost all of us started carrying, at this time, these little recorders. Probably can't see it real well. Just something you put in your pocket. And then if the violator said the officer was rude to me, and so on and so forth, we pull out the recorder in front of the jury, and we would say, I explained the law. First I asked quietly. I explained the law. I explained the consequences 3 or 4 times, and the person still refused to comply with my verbal commands, and things went well. And the complaints went down generally 70%, again, because it was the quote problem officers. Nowadays, I refer to it as officers who have problems.
And pause right there for a second, David, because you last week we were talking about the early warning system. One of the questions maybe was Amani was how to identify officers that are having issues and to get ahead of it. And that what David was talking about is the precursor to the early warning system. So officers that have a number of complaints that are sustained to get those officers mental health services. So it was difficult to show how all 4 of these episodes during September intersect at so many different points, and that was just one of those other points from last week's about answering the questions from the audience about what are we doing to get ahead of some of these issues.
And speaking of early warning system, what I came up with was an early intervention system that I teach. I did a job analysis, and I've identified 121 behavioral and appearance indicators for sergeants and fellow officers when they're observing their fellow officers to say, this officer may be experiencing a mental health challenge. So here's how to approach them. And here's how to get them to peer counseling, hopefully before they cross the threshold into early warning venture, and then second into internal affairs. So again, that was. Now, the other thing, again, I come from a performance engineering profession, and in that, when we design instruction, we have a guarantee that when people finish the course, they will produce the results. Where we come from, knowledge and information has little or no value other than to support what it takes to produce a result. So, for example, think about firearms. You can't or play the piano. You can't lecture for 40 hours and say, now play this piece. Over the last, again, I've been teaching since 1967, and I've discovered that if somebody lectures for 90 seconds at the most, that's the maximum attention span of a student, their mind goes off somewhere else. Excuse me. The exceptions are life or death, making money, or sex. Then they pay attention. But outside that, so for example, when I teach, 90% of it is practice, 10% of it is lecture, whether it's firearms or whether it's de-escalation. Now, going back to de-escalation, in the quote past, de-escalation was not expected by citizens. They said, okay, police have to use force, and that's okay, we can do that. Now, the marketing of de-escalation has been very high. And in my opinion, and a large number of us believe, it's marketing by people who want to degrade the police, because the public thinks that we should de-escalate all the time. When people do that, I ask them to go into a simulator and see how quickly they get shot.
If I can pause there for David to show where it intersects with what's going on new, Citizens Police Academies, which I mentioned last week, they are allowed to go into those simulators and be in a class about how to use of force. And so they have a much better idea of what a typical law enforcement goes through. So the law enforcement officer goes through. So thank you, David. Continue.
And Dr. Tim is one of the premier instructors in that field, especially in virtual simulation. The other things, folks, is going through a role play with what's called simunition. It's sort of plastic bullets. And the first thing you do is the instructor shoots you in the thigh. So you feel that it really hurts and you have a bruise. Now you go through the simulation and you try to de-escalate, and generally real world examples that we have, the violator or the suspect shoots the participant. And they say, gee, I just got shot. That hurts and I'm going to have a bruise now. And they say, okay, so de-escalation doesn't work. And then they push it for mental illness. People who are having a mental health crisis, they want us to de-escalate. There's this crisis intervention team training that overall is pretty good, but what they keep omitting is a lot of examples where it's not true. In performance-based training, we have rule example, non-example. So we have, here's the non-example when not to use it. But the pressure is to use it, especially since everybody has got a smartphone with a camera on it, and you've got a body camera on. So officers are pushing to do de-escalation to the point that they get shot and hurt.
But if I can do a pause on that one. So, my dissertation was done on emotional intelligence, procedural justice behaviors. one of the concepts that we were pushing is not only just de-escalation, but non-escalation. That's a bridge that David's talking about, which is the old school cops that are refusing to change. So they actually bring the escalation to what is maybe a neutral situation. How about non-escalation? Let's all start at ground zero and move up or down the use of force scale from there.
And that's great. And what Tim has done and applied to, and if y'all can do that, apply emotional intelligence early in the academy. That would be verbal judo on steroids, I think.
And so I'll do a commercial break for that one because again, Dr. Greg could not be here today. He has worked with an academy, I believe it was Louisiana. They had a higher failure rate. Does anyone take a guess how much a new hire for law enforcement costs between recruitment, onboarding, uniforms? Take a wild guess.
I'm going to say it's well over $100,000, probably in the about 120, 130,000.
Oh, so with that the price is right. You're higher. So, but you're in the ballpark. So between $75,000 to $100,000. So this academy had a high failure rate. As a state police academy, they had a high failure rate. And by using them, to David's point, by bringing in emotional intelligence at the beginning, not just for the students, but for the instructors.
Mhm.
Because do we learn as adult learners when people are yelling at us? Not really. So there's still that paramilitary part. There is still that component to it, but it's also brought in some adult learning techniques where there's emotional intelligence. That way, the adult learners are more likely to learn. And they brought it down to a 0 failure rate simply by implementing emotional intelligence behaviors throughout the entire academy.
Now, again, it depends on how you test. Again, if you test on knowledge, 99% of the time, it does not transfer to on-job performance. So as IO psychologists, here's what I urge you to do. There's only 4 reasons that we've ever found that people do not perform to standards. If you find another one, let me know. That's another dissertation. The first and most frequent is the motivation incentive. Almost at 80% of the time, people are rewarded for doing it wrong, punished for doing it right. The second most frequent, say again?
Sounds like leadership.
The second most frequent cause is what we call environmental support. They don't have the tools, equipment, the time, the right type or quality of supervision. A relatively infrequent time, it's the lack of skill. Now, people say skill or knowledge, but again, more knowledge than it takes to produce the skill almost always degrades performance. Then the fourth is personnel selection and assignment. Those 4 things you will always find that's the problem. Now, people think it's the police chief's problem, but it's not. It's the leader of the government or organization that the police department reports to. Let's just take a city. So the mayor or the city council people, the city manager, that's where it starts. And Tom, back to you on your question. Your question is profound about good news, bad news. Police do a horrible job in marketing. The Marines, the SEALs do a great job. Coca-Cola does a great job. So as IO psychologists, marketing, if you can show a police department how to market the good stuff. Now, if you look on LinkedIn, it's getting a little better because they show all the community involvement and all that kind of stuff. Now, the other thing, if you do want to help police, I urge you to be culturally competent. The citizens who want to be police are extraordinarily naive and they're 180 degrees out of phase. The years I've taught in the academy, every class I asked, why do you want to be a cop? now a city cop or a state cop, and they say, I want to help people. I said, oh, tell me some behaviors of helping. Well, I want to put my arm around some kid going down the wrong path and guide him away from drugs or prostitution.
Is that there are those opportunities where we can put our arm around that child and direct them onto the right path.
It's just relatively rare. And unfortunately, it's not measured very well, right? We can talk about that. And Tim, that's great. The key is let's find ways of doing that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The second thing, if they misbehave or they don't comply, oh, I'm sorry, if they do comply, then we probably cost them some money. So if we stop them, now it's going to cost them some money. More than likely, it'll cost them some money. If they don't comply with verbal commands, then we tase them, we hit them with a baton, hit them with chemical spray, or whatever. And if they threaten us, then we tase them or shoot them. If we put them in custody, they go to jail.
If I can put a pause on that as well, that's why Project EQ in West Virginia is having emotional intelligence training for all certified peace officers, including the jail. So, and there are a lot of research studies out there about when you bring in emotional intelligence to a place like the jail, not only does it benefit the inmates, but also the people that staff the jail as well.
So I hope all of y'all implement emotional intelligence in law enforcement. But when you teach it, I urge you, do not lecture more than 10% of the time. It should be massive amounts of role play. For example, I found when I was on the street, I'd go by the pharmacy, the hardware store, the hairdresser, the nail salon, whatever, all those stores. You know, hi, I'm Officer Schiff, here's my card. And using the sincere, genuine communication. If you see any problems, please let us know, because a good bit of law enforcement is done by non-LEOs, non-law enforcement officers. So again, that's it. That can help. And then say, are you having any difficulties? And if you stop by them long enough, but again, if you teach it, the teaching must be 90% practice. I know when I went through clinical training, you know, we did massive amounts of interviews. And then when we did the internship and the practical, we had to role play it. I mean, we had to record it. And we do that. So law enforcement can help. But I did crime analysis, and one time,
David, can I hit pause for a sec? Tom,
okay.
do you have any questions on the chat for David?
Oh.
Or raise hands for David?
Oh, good.
Get
Get the discussion going.
Oh, there you go, Nick.
It's an interesting discussion as we've kind of changed the standards of what the social expectation is for police and things like that. You know, people are like, I want to help, and this, you know, the boys in blue, that those are the helpers, those are the people you want to follow after. But then realizing what the actual expectation is, it certainly changes things. I think there's a question of how much are we asking our police force to do? What is the expectation there? Because I think here in Denver, there is a partnership with mental health professionals where they may send more of a counseling team, and they are not law enforcement officers. They are trained specifically for, you know, the situation. And then, you know, failing that, then police involvement happens. But getting different agencies to kind of stay in their lane and do their job properly and not put so much on the police, I think it's kind of the right tool for the right job. You know, as Dr. Schiff was talking about, you know, lecture isn't effective, so we have to do role play to get it to work. De-escalation could put you at risk. So what is the right tool in the right situation for the right person? I mean, that's, you know, you can spiderweb that to 1,000 possibilities, but how do we take that view And maybe put that in the police marketing of, hey, my lane is here and I'm happy to be here. And let's go find somebody who can take care of these other things. And how many opportunities does that create for collaboration for the police and the community and things like that?
Tim, that's the profound question. That's wonderful. And the research needs to be done on that. And again, my experience as both a independent consultant who is paid only on results and cop is marketing. So, for example, within the culture, it used to be, and it still is today, when Harry and Bill meet each other and they want to see who's the better cop, Harry says, how many arrests have you had? I've had, 427 in the last 2 years. Then Bill says, I've only had 200, but Harry, how many felony arrests have you had? I've never had an officer I've never had, and again, I've been across the country, I've interviewed probably out of 18,000 departments I think we have in the country, I've interviewed over a couple of hundred. Nobody says, how many crimes have you stopped? Right? How many news articles have put it, crime reduced? Now, if you look at how people, psychologically, how people use numbers. In crime analysis, here's how it's taught. How to make good numbers look bad and bad numbers look good. So let's say burglaries went up from 100 to 130, right? But let's say the population increased a little bit. So now instead of presenting 130, that burglaries went up 30, the burglary rate went down. Crime rate went down. So that's one way to market it. Now, if the police chief wants more money to hire more people, he says burglaries went up. But what happened is, if you look at it carefully, and this is what IOSI can do in performance engineering, you start asking questions. That's what we do as scientists, right? And engineers. Has the population increased? Yes. What businesses increased? Oh, well, we got 2 strip bars in here. Okay, so that's been up. Prostitution's up. If you look at, for example, the cities where they have homeless out on the sidewalk, doing drugs in open view, and you ask, why haven't the police arrested those people? Think of that. Why haven't they arrested them? That's local and federal crime. It's because the cartels provide the drugs to the population. So the people on drugs go out and steal. And then what did they do? They reduce shoplifting in several areas to below $1,000. If you shoplift below $1,000 and then sell it, you can buy drugs. The cartels do it. And guess who provides the money for marketing? Defund the police. Police should de-escalate. Police should maintain mental health. Our dealing with the mental health crisis is relatively new.
Thank you very much for that. Emmy, you are up next. Let's go to you.
Hello. I wanted to just make a quick couple of comments and then ask a question. I'd put it in the chat, but I'll ask it verbally. I happen to live next door to the second longest tenured Houston police officer. My husband's also a Houston police officer, but the guy next door is, I think he's been on like 44 years. It's amazing to think about the changes he's seen, and he's not looking to retire anytime soon. Ironically, he's loving it still. So pretty cool to hear about the changes that have happened over the decades. But one of the positive use cases that I wanted to make sure I mentioned that I had loved seeing videos for in Houston was their homeless outreach team. There was actually a 2-man team. I think it's now, probably at least 8 or 9 at this point. But when they put the first videos out, there was 2 or 3 people that were on the team, and they got to know and build relationships with the homeless community in Houston. And that's not to say that they never had to arrest them, right? Like if you've trespassed in the same location 100 times, then you're going to jail. But it is to say that they developed relationships with this community. They did a lot of outreach there, and they had a lot of success with getting these homeless people out there in the downtown Houston area into housing in some different cases. And that's a really complex issue. It's not just, house people and then, everything's okay. There's a lot of mental health involved and all of that. But that team did an amazing job. They worked also with psychologists and a clinical team and have just done some really amazing work in Houston. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that as a positive thing that's happened out there that you don't get to hear too much about. The video, if you ever look it up, for the Houston Homeless Outreach Team, will bring a tear to your eye if you're out there to go look. The question I really had, based on the topic that this episode was really titled on, about enhancing policing in the modern age, right? And so you really think about the concept of modernizing, which means you're in the dinosaur age and you're bringing something to the modern time, right? That's the concept of what modernize means. And the question I really have is, when you're thinking about changes or making updates into policing, whether it's implementing technology, emotional intelligence, or any other factors that have been very successful, where are you really looking to target? Are you trying to modernize, right? Bring to current age or current state changes? Are you looking 5 years, 10 years, 25 years out? Where's that big impact that you're looking to make when you're working with some of these departments?
Actually, I can kind of tie these two together because Dave and I partner on a lot of this stuff. So yes, as far as the immediate, short, long-term goals, it's as part of an evolution, and it's a multi-pronged approach. So yes, to technology, we've seen body-worn cameras. That's become the standard and expected that every agency has body-worn cameras, but there's still a lot out there that don't. So yes, so on all of those prongs going forward, again, Dr. Ed Campbell, who due to a family emergency could not be here, he and I really bonded and connected. I met him through LinkedIn as I was working on the dissertation, and we're fond of saying that something is a way, not the way. And how we really connected was in our beliefs and our multi decades of law enforcement. Emotional intelligence is the way. Every time you hear someone talking about de-escalation, it's emotional intelligence. But to David's point, it still has to be juxtaposed on the other, balanced on the other side with you can't always successfully de-escalate through emotional intelligence, but it can solve so many issues that have brought us to where we are today, because it was not a tool that was, even if we had it on our tool belt, it was not a valued tool, to David's point about how many arrests did you make versus how many people did you help. And so those were the metrics that your street cops were placing. And as the next generations are filtering through, the law enforcement is improving one retirement at a time. On the flip side, other than your neighbor, other than we are also having a brain drain. There are good police officers out there that are just tired of fighting the good fight, and they too are retiring. So we're working with retirees that still want to be part of the solution to bring them back in a part-time status. And we're also talking about mentorships. So we're re-examining the law enforcement workplace. But to David's point, he's worked with many agencies across the entire country. Not all of them want to change.
And most of them don't particularly want to change. The key is, the only way you get change is from the governing agency under which they get their authority. You have to sell it to the city council. And if it's federal, to the federal. If it's state, to the federal, to the state level. and again, EI is a marketing issue. That's got to be marketed and then rewarded. And when somebody says, I want to help, then as a scientist, start asking and question to the void. What are the helping behaviors? How are you going to measure it? How is the organization going to support it? How is it going to be rewarded? How is it going to be recognized? You know, people say you ought to help people. You ought to do this. Well, as scientists and psychologists, ask the questions. And again, whatever you think of Skinner, you know, he had it down, because the whole thing is, the thing in law enforcement is controlling behavior. That's our job. Control behavior of the bad people. Now, quote, we help good people by putting bad people away or providing them strong negative consequences.
One of the things that when
Now,
David
one more-
together on
one-
such things,
One more quick one.
Okay.
We are, quote, communication professionals. Ideally, voice and verbal. The next is hands-on or force. But we are communication professionals. To my knowledge, that's not being taught very well in the academies. And by teaching, I don't mean lecturing. When I talk about, well, teaching is lecturing, we talk about training. Otherwise, what we call it is infotainment or edutainment.
and he got there. That's what I was trying to get to, is David brings it on home of sustained positive changes in behavior. So we always say, well, they need more training. To David's point, you can train all day long, but if you don't use it, or if it's not valued, or there's no way to measure, put metrics around it, which is David is the king of putting words around and metrics onto the behaviors you want to see changed.
Okay, Tim, let me add to that. Training in and of itself has almost no value unless once they leave the training environment, the on-job is supporting it with environmental support, motivational support. For example, when I was in crime analysis, we had some burglaries in some particular areas, and I predicted the crime will be here. So they went out there, they sat, the crime occurred, and they arrested them. Then I said, okay, the crime's going to be there. Next week, it's going to be there. So they put several officers out there, no crime. Okay, did David screw it up and not get it right? Was his math screwed up? Or did they actually prevent crime? We don't know. So that's one of the problems with crime prevention. And let me assure you, one thing to help you become culturally competent, you cannot, my opinion, and those of many of us in law enforcement, you cannot prevent crime. You can move it to the next jurisdiction.
Thank you very much for that. Oh, did you have one thing you wanted to add there, Tim?
Tom, who is next?
We got about 10 minutes left. Dr. Matt, we're going to go to you next. But I just wanted to say, I have always wanted to do some training with law enforcement and teach them how to use their voice.
And Tom, make sure that after you teach them, that it's supported once they get on the job.
There you go. All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Matt, to you.
Yeah, so I absolutely enjoying this conversation, and I'll try to keep it quick because I know we have a few other hands as well. But both David and Tim, a lot of what you talked about, marketing the good stuff. And last week we went down that as well. Talking about what went well, celebrating the success, marketing that success, not just prioritizing or looking at what do we need to change, what's wrong, but really looking at, okay, what did we do well, and then building off of that. And David, you had talked about, with those 4 reasons. That second reason you talked about, the environmental support, that is so critical for sustained behavior change and development. Is you can learn everything you want in the classroom, you can pass every test, but if you go out into the real world and it's not anything like that test, good luck. The ability to retain that is going to be very low. And then whatever may be retained, if it's not supported over time, it's going to be lost as well. So I love that you talked about that. But my question, Tim, you had talked about you've talked a lot about emotional intelligence, and I absolutely appreciate that. When as David, as you were talking about some of the de-escalation or non-escalation, the engagement with the community, my curiosity started to peak around, as departments, as police officers integrate that emotional intelligence behavior, that training, and they start to see that positive interaction with the community. How does that have a sort of a circular support back to improved officer morale or overall job satisfaction, which when you look at mental health, resilience, and emotional intelligence, again, going back to that, what does that overall supportive environment look like? And so I'm curious, when you have those improved community engagements, what does that look like in terms of any impact on officer morale?
All right, gentlemen, 2 minutes or less.
Thank you. Yes, it does, but it has to be top down, bottom up, because if the officers are doing it front facing out to the community and they're having better engagements, but they go back to headquarters and they're met with a lot of negativity, if they're not endorsing it, to your point about the environment, it's not fully sustained. And when I was doing the research and I was teaching class in order to get my data, I had chief executives that were in my class and I asked them the question, are you gruntled? You can get disgruntled. Do you look forward to going to work? And the unvarnished conversation was they are not looking forward to going to work. They've lost their joy. So to your point, Dr. Matt, it's about the environment. It's a complete package issue. And we do it one at a time. So, and look for those examples of agencies that are doing it, right. Thank you for that question. All right, Tom, who is next?
Thank you very much. Jen, welcome to Work Cookie. Unmute your mic and share your thoughts with us.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for the conversation. Great content. And Imani, your comment about the 44 year police officer, that makes my not even 4 years look like a pile of crap. But I'm not currently in law enforcement. I did come from a department that had a 47% they're just not retaining officers, and it was a 47% quit rate in 2022. I don't know the data from 2023, but yeah, it was 47% in 2022. And so my question is, and I'm in a dual industrial organizational psychology and MBA program through the University of Hartford. And so I'm in an intro class right now, and we actually just covered emotional intelligence. So, and I'm actually writing a paper on emotional intelligence in law enforcement, and workplace incivility and workplace bullying. So my question is, and I mean, this is the novice coming out in me as an IO student, but how can emotional intelligence be measured beyond self-report data, if that's even possible?
That is a great question. And Jen, the reason why that is how I got my start down this path like 10, 12 years ago, the bully at work, or the other one was the no a-hole rule. So there's several books, but that's how I got my start. And working in the government is different than other organizations. And so doctors Gary Namey, N-A-M-E, and his wife, I heard it, but it's doctors Namey and Amy, the no bully rule or the bully at work. They specialize in the governmental workplaces because they're very unique. To your point, you're right. Self-report data is the least, but that's where you get the 360s. It's very important to get the 360s because you're always going to have those people that rate themselves as all 5s out of 5, and they're delusional. Where you get the other supporting data is the 360s that support it, and they can bring that person down to a more realistic goal. So self-report data on its own, if that's the best you've got, it's what you got. Because remember, it's a teachable skill. I got one more with Amani. I see your hand up.
Yeah, there you
go. Thank you so much for the information that you've given today. For me, I would just still say I'm new in the USA. Knowing some of this information has been kind of empowering. When you say that you guys are only there to protect the people that you take in, that has been kind of such a different, perspective, and you kind of changed my mindset somehow. And I believe it's also going to be to some listeners that, hey, we don't get there to protect necessarily you guys, but to protect, the people that we have in possession, then the ignorant point of view. And the only information that I'm accessing is the information now through social medias, through news, and I haven't yet even, got information from people like you or people who have been well informed. Ignorance somehow also creates entitlement. I've been ignorant. I'm so entitled to that protection. My expectations have been managed. I feel like that accountability has got to go both ends, because with my entitlement, my ego's been kind of managed, which goes back to say that emotional intelligence will be a very good bridge.
I'm sorry,
That-
Manny, I got to cut you off. Next week, we're going to continue the conversation with
All right.
leveraging IO psychology to attract and retain top talent in policing. Tim and David, thank you very much for all of the wonderful information you brought with us today. Tim, real quick, do you want to give us a little bit of a preview?
Yeah, so it's hiring, retention, and recruitment, areas that we all deal with at IO. And so we're going to have 2 police psychologists that will come out and talk about psychological screenings and what they are doing in the workforce to help hire better police officers and make sure we screen for the right people, and also everything that they do. So kind of a different perspective of the workplace from other psychologists.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you, everyone, for participating today. Jen, shout out to you. It's always great to have a student on the podcast. And now you can quote both Tim and David in your paper and go get an A and then come back and tell us how you did. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been great. Love these discussions. And we will see everyone back here in 1 week's time.